Yeah. When I feel down, I'm gonna run to you. Whenever I feel down, when I feel down, I'm gonna run to you. Oh.
Hey everyone, welcome to Village for Change, our Why We Need the Village podcast. My name is Connie Jacob, and today I am recording this also live on Instagram because we just want to get the word out. We want to start raising up the village when it comes to our kids. And again, the purpose of this podcast is not for me to talk. I'm going to be having some great guests on. If you want to be a guest on my podcast, I would love to have you involved. If you're a parent or you're an educator and you see kids falling through the cracks, I want to talk to you. When it comes to our podcast, I make them short so that you can listen to them on a commute, on your walk, while you're making dinner. This podcast was actually inspired by an educator who said to me, Connie, you have got some incredible things that we need to be hearing right now as parents and educators. We just don't have time. We don't have time to join webinars. We don't have time, to join different things outside of school, but a podcast. I would listen to a podcast. And so that's exactly why I started this, because it was all about serving. It's all about serving you and getting you involved in the conversation. And so again, we have a group, a Facebook group called The Village in our Village for Change Facebook page. Join it because this is where I post the podcasts, and this is where you can interact and meet other people who are passionate about bringing the village back to our kids. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to advocate for your child. For myself, I have been advocating. I have two boys, so I've been advocating a lot, but mostly for my oldest son, who school just has never really worked out for him. I mean, out of the 10 years that he's been in school, he has maybe liked kindergarten, grade 3 and grade 6. Other than that, it has been an absolute battle. And I was talking to a parent this week who was about to go and advocate for her son to her teacher. And she's like, I have no idea how to advocate for him. And on the other hand, I've also talked to educators who, sometimes say that parents are hard to work with because either A, they don't want to recognize that their child is struggling, or B, they recognize their child is struggling and all the parent is doing is saying, you fix it, you do something about it. Now, I'm not about to win any popularity contest with parents. Just please remember, I am team parent and I am team educator. But one of the things I share, and I believe for myself personally, but I share with parents, is that you and I are the CEOs of our home. We are the creators of our home. And when it comes to the education of our kids, it is not the teacher's responsibility to make sure that my kid makes it. They have to work within their scope of practice. They are not psychologists. They're not mental health professionals. They haven't been trained for those things. We need to remember that. And we need to, as the parents, how many times have I basically jumped in to a school where I can see that all of the scope of practice in which they have and their techniques and their resources and what they are limited to do for my sons have not been able to help them. I've had to jump in and I've had to be like, look, I'm going to have to find something that works for them outside of the box. Now, I know I didn't just win friends right there, because no parent, like parents are thinking, wait a minute, if I'm going to send my kids to school, should they not know how to work with my child that has very special needs? And in a perfect world, that's where we're going. That's what I would love to see. I dream of education being flipped over and upside down and shaken up a little bit so that educators actually have not only the tools that they need, the training that they need. We need to educate them differently in universities. But until we get there, unfortunately, us as the parents, I've had to go rogue a little bit. Actually, one principal even said that to me once. She says, you seem to just keep going rogue on us. I'm like, that's because what my son needs and what you're able to provide, they're not matching. And I just want you to know that I am team education. I am team teachers, team principles, but at the end of the day, it's my son who matters to me the most, not your opinion, not us checking off the boxes. I once challenged an educator because their goal, their only goal, he was in a specialized mental health program. Okay, so this was a specialized class. There were maybe 8 kids in this class. And in this class, they had a psychologist, they had behavioral specialists, they had teachers who knew how to work with kids who are struggling with anxiety. The problem with their model was that their only motivation, the counseling that went on, the psychologist that went on there, the only thing that they were trying to do was get my son to come to school. And that's been the biggest problem I've noticed in education. The scope of practice is you get them to the building, we'll deal with it. The problem is that I got him to the building and I would get texts in the middle of the day. He's like, I can't be here, texts of overwhelm. And they were doing their best with what they had. And so this is not a criticism, but this is me saying I had to advocate and say, this is not enough. And when we came to the understanding that what they had to provide and what my son needed was not going to be met in the school, well, I had to get creative. So one of the things that I love to encourage parents to do is, first of all, our kids come first. Our kids come first. We do not try to fit inside any system, whether that be education, whether that be mental health, whether that be the health, actual physical health. We advocate for what our children need. And if you don't see it with what is provided in your local school, then you need to go out and research. You need to figure out. There's never been more opportunities and resources out there. The problem is finding it. And that is a barrier for parents, even for me. I mean, I have a mental health and resilient background, and it's been hard for me to find resources, find time to find resources. But I'll tell you, you are creative. I want to remind you of that. I want to remind all the parents listening that you are creative. I want to remind all of the educators listening that you're creative. And as you start to notice the gaps, oftentimes we can get very discouraged. We can feel overwhelmed. We can feel like nothing is ever going to change. The problem is that by burying our heads in worry, we're not getting anywhere. What we need to do is we need to think outside the box. I always say, in order to reach the kids on the fringes, we have to be willing to break some rules. And if your school can't break the rules, then we need to be thinking about, okay, well, what is possible? Because there's always 2 options in every scenario, no matter what you're facing: parenting, educating, living life. There's controllables and there's uncontrollables. For the controllables, the things that we can control, we need an action plan. So in the case of parenting, what is best for my child? Mental health, the meds aren't working. Well, I tried a naturopath. When the naturopath doesn't work, well, we're trying this. We're constantly trying new things. You need to be willing to try. I can control that. So I need an action plan. I need an action plan to know, okay, this school is doing the best they can with what they know. The parent is doing the best they can with what they know. What does this child need? And we need to come back to the child being the center of our conversations, more than I'm right, or I need to be right, or you need to see it my way. We need to put it back with the children first. So that's what we can control. Think about all the things that you can control. You can control the research that you do, the amount that you try, the willingness to go outside the box. But then there's uncontrollables. Uncontrollables I've noticed in advocating for my boys is sometimes the school is limited. They have their scope of practice, and I need to be forgiving and I need to be understanding. I need to know that they're trying the best that they can. And whenever we have an uncontrollable, we don't need an action plan for that. We need a coping plan. I need to know how to cope. How am I emotionally going to take it when the school cannot meet my son's needs? How am I going to take that? Well, I'm going to not blame them. That's something that I can do. My coping plan is I need to realize that no one's to blame here. This is not their fault. This is not my fault. We're always looking for who's at fault. It's their fault. It's his fault. And so we need to avoid that. So the coping plan is to learn how to let go of blame, at least in my case. When it comes to not being able to find the right mental health help, knocking on door after door, that feels uncontrollable. And the fact that we still live in this disease model right now, where it's always about what's wrong with this child. We need to diagnose this child. We need to figure out what's wrong so we can fix it. I mean, I need a coping plan for that. So my coping plan for this idea of what's wrong with my child is to realize actually there's a whole lot right with him. There's a whole lot right with your child. What is right about your child? In fact, when you're advocating for your children, advocate for what you see as strong, not what you see as wrong. Because oftentimes our children will literally listen to us talking to the teacher talking to us, and they'll hear us talk about all their limitations. This child cannot do this because. And think about it. If that was you or if that was me, how would we respond if we were constantly being told what we can and what we cannot do? Think about what that would do to your self-esteem. Think about what that would do to your ability to go past limitations and be an overcomer. Like, just think about it for a minute. And so that's why I think that we need a coping plan, in the sense that I advocate for strength. And that's one of the things that we believe at the company that I work for, Flourishing. It's a psychology term. What is strong about you rather than what's wrong? And when we start with a child's strength, I've seen this. 25 years of working in mental health and resilience, working with some of the roughest kids, working with affluent, middle class, kids from lower income communities, all around. You start with their strength. I promise you, it's going to motivate them. It's going to inspire them. It's going to lift the bar to something that they can live up to. That's a way I can cope when the mental health system fails me in that moment, when the education system can't seem to meet my needs in this moment. That's how I cope. I focus on what's strong, and I figure out, how can I, as a parent or an educator, strongly support that child with my bottom hands in that strength rather than just the weakness. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't focus on the weakness. It doesn't mean we don't go to the psychiatrist to get medication. It doesn't mean that we don't get counseling. But what it means is that we make the child our center focus of our conversation again, rather than what the adults think is right. Again, we got our son to school. The teacher checked off their checkbox. I checked off my checkbox. The adults felt fantastic, but my son did not. That's when we lose. We lose when we feel good because they did what we wanted them to do. They did what we thought was best for them. In that moment, we're not listening to them, and then they just keep spiraling downwards. So advocating for our kids, number one, we need to keep them as the center. Number two, we need to remember their strength, because from strength comes more strength. Strength begets strength, but weakness also begets weakness. And if all you ever hear is you are oppositional, you have attention deficit disorder, think about that for a minute. You have depression, you have anxiety. I've literally had youth argue with me saying, no, you don't get it. I am anxious. I'm like, no, a part of you is anxious. Not all of you is anxious. But they'll argue for, no, I am depressed. I am oppositional. It becomes the identity that they form in their hearts because it's all they've ever heard us refer to them as, rather than revolutionary, artist, creative, outside of the box thinker. This is what we need to advocate for. Advocate for strength. Put them back at the center of the conversation. And what I would love to hear from both educator and both parent is, what does it look like for you? What has this stirred up for you? Maybe you disagree with me on something. I'd love to hear about it, because this is where we can put the child back as the center focus of our conversation and talk about what some of the real issues are. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say, and I will see you next time.
When I feel down, I feel right down.